I cheated with my husband's brother for years. I got pregnant and lied about the paternity, forcing him to raise a daughter that wasn't his. But he found out and planned brutal revenge. My name is Andrea. Today I am 37 years old, but this story begins when I was just a lost 17-year-old teenager. I grew up in Hermosillo, in the north of Mexico, in a house where screams were more constant than silence. My mother was too busy judging the clothes I wore, and my father, well, he practically disappeared from our lives when I was 12 years old. I became independent early, perhaps too early. I was always the strong one, the one who laughed out loud, the one who acted like she did not care. Inside, I was just a broken girl trying to survive in a world that seemed cruel to me. It was during that time that I met Alejandro, and, ironically, he was everything I claimed to hate. Alejandro was also 17 years old. He worked in a workshop with his stepfather and lived in the same neighborhood as my aunt. He was a quiet guy, but he had a sweet look, the kind that makes you want to tell secrets. The son of an emotionally absent mother and a biological father who disappeared before he learned to walk, he was raised by Ernesto, his stepfather, who, despite being simple, treated him with dignity. Alejandro was not one of those people who talked a lot, but when he did, you felt he was completely there. He had a way of listening to me that made me feel like I finally mattered, except I did not really know how to deal with someone like that. We fell in love at an almost irresponsible speed. At 19 years old, I discovered I was pregnant. While my head was spinning, Alejandro asked me to marry him. He gave up everything, including his dream of joining the armed forces, and began to work twice as hard to ensure a decent life for our daughter. We got married in an impromptu ceremony in his aunt's backyard, surrounded by family, the smell of grilled meat, and promises I already feared I could not keep. As he looked at me as if he had found his world, I felt like someone who was about to escape from her own body. In the first few months, I tried to adapt to that new life as a wife, mother, and homemaker. But something inside me was screaming. Alejandro was too dedicated, too kind, and that suffocated me. It was not his fault. It was as if all the love he gave me was a mirror of what I felt was missing inside of me. He left my coffee ready before he left. He sent me loving messages. He took care of Camila as if she were gold. And all of this made me feel worse, because I knew I could not give back even half of that. I faked smiles. I got involved with the chores, with motherhood, with the house, but inside I felt like a broken glass about to shatter. Alejandro, with his dreams of building the perfect family, did not realize his wife was already broken. And how could he? I hid everything. I even hid it from myself. I never talked about the traumas, the psychological abuse from my childhood, the constant fear of being discarded. Alejandro was stable, and that scared me more than any fight. I did not know how to live in peace. I never learned. The truth is that, from the beginning, I felt I did not deserve him, and that pushed me away from him every day, silently and cruelly. Our daughter was beautiful, healthy, and he did everything for us. But instead of feeling grateful, I felt trapped in a role I had accepted myself, but never knew how to portray. And while Alejandro dreamed of building, I was already beginning, unconsciously, to destroy. It was not all at once. It began slowly, with little secrets, empty glances, and the bitter seed of guilt that I pretended not to see growing. After the birth of our daughter, Camila, Alejandro decided to take a safer path and enlisted in the army. He spent a little over 3 years abroad, serving in different cities, while I stayed at home with the baby. It was not easy. I felt exhausted, overwhelmed, and above all, lonely. When he returned, he got a job as a security chief at a valuables transport company. He was more mature, more reserved, and even more dedicated to his family. I, on the other hand, was already carrying an anguish that he did not perceive, or perhaps preferred not to perceive. During this period, I struggled to move forward. I went to business school at night. I studied when Camila slept and used my free time to work as an assistant at a local bank. Little by little, I grew there. We gained stability, our own house, a car, trips to visit family in Monterey during the holidays. Seen from the outside, we were an exemplary couple, the perfect life. But the truth is that this perfection was eating me up, because deep down, none of it filled the void I felt every time Alejandro came home and kissed me without noticing that I was broken inside. He always seemed too tired to really talk. He would arrive, have dinner, watch the news, and fall asleep with Camila on my lap. And I would get ready, put on perfume, wait for a compliment that never came. We felt like we were living in parallel worlds, connected only by our responsibilities. Alejandro was a good father, a good provider, but he had disappeared as a man. And I, suffocated by that role of mother, wife, and professional, yearned for anything that would make me feel desired, alive, interesting. I started to notice the looks at work, the messages from colleagues, the veiled flirting. At first, it just fed my ego. I dressed better, smiled more, responded politely, but I kept it all to myself. But little by little, that became an escape. Every compliment I received reminded me of what I had not managed to be. I started to think about what my life would have been like if I had made different decisions. It was not anger towards Alejandro. It was a silent resentment that grew every time I saw my reflection and did not recognize the woman I had become. I do not remember exactly when I stopped loving him. Maybe it was never a full love, but rather a distorted gratitude, a need disguised as passion. I told myself that I was just tired, that it was a phase, that everything would go back to normal. But the truth is that I no longer saw a future there. We had everything, but the essential thing was missing, the connection. He saw me as the mother of his daughter, and I wanted to be seen as a woman. I did not know how else to ask without seeming ungrateful. So I stopped asking. It was in that invisible space between us that the darkness began to settle. I would smile at company parties, at school meetings, when I visited my mother-in-law. But inside me, the feeling was that I was living someone else's life. Alejandro continued to be the same good man he had always been, hardworking, loyal, dedicated. But the more he tried to keep everything in order, the more I pulled away emotionally. I was so lost in myself that I did not even notice the abyss that was beginning to open between us. And once it was open, there was no way to pretend it did not exist. Camila has always been my weak spot. Since she was born, I promised myself that she would never feel the emotional abandonment that I experienced. My job was to protect her from everything, even from her father, when I thought he was being too harsh. Alejandro was methodical, firm, and believed that discipline was a demonstration of love. I saw it as rigidity, so every time he scolded her for a bad grade or for breaking a rule, I would intervene. This created unnecessary friction. I defended Camila with tooth and nail, as if she were too fragile to face limits. At first, I thought I was doing the right thing. I was the understanding mother, the one who listened, the one who let her express herself. When she started talking back to Alejandro, I thought it was just adolescence, but deep down, I already knew something was wrong. Camila did not respect him as she should. She would start to discredit him, to laugh when he tried to impose a rule. And I let it go, because I always thought Alejandro was exaggerating. And why? Maybe it would be easier to keep her close to me and away from him. Of course, there was a bigger reason behind it, although I admitted it much later. I was afraid of the truth coming out. I was afraid of what would happen if Alejandro discovered that maybe, just maybe, Camila was not his biological daughter. He loved her so intensely, so purely, that just imagining the damage left me paralyzed. So I compensated for my guilt by trying to be the perfect mother. And part of that perfection, in my mind, included being the protector, the friend, the confidant, even if it meant discrediting the man who raised our daughter with so much love. The truth is, without realizing it, I created a chasm between them. I gave Camila the idea that she was always right, that her father was too harsh, and that she could only trust me. And every time she belittled Alejandro, I destroyed the image she had of him a little more. It was as if I was trying to erase any connection between the two, because deep down I knew that one dirty lie could bring everything down. And I preferred to deceive myself, to pretend I was doing the right thing, when in reality I was only protecting myself. Camila grew up without understanding the sacrifices Alejandro made for her. When he saved for months to buy a used car for her 17th birthday, She did not even thank him. She thought it was not enough. She said she would have preferred to get a new one and, instead of scolding her, I patted her on the head. I said I understood, that he could have tried harder. I said this while looking into the eyes of a man who gave up his youth to raise that girl. And still, I kept pretending. I kept hiding everything, thinking that deep down this would protect us, but what I called protection was actually cowardice. Camila became an extension of my guilt. I turned her into a shield, an excuse, a redemption. And in that attempt to amend my mistake by hiding the truth from her, I pushed her away from the only man who truly loved her without reservations. I failed Alejandro, yes, but what hurts me most today is admitting that I also failed Camila. And the worst part, I was just beginning to realize the magnitude of the destruction I had started. The mistake that changed everything began on a night of silent anger and choked tears. Alejandro and I had had a big argument. I do not even remember what it was about. Maybe it was about Camila. Maybe it was about our lack of connection. Maybe it was just the weight of everything collapsing at once. He left, as he always did when he needed to cool off, and I was left alone at home. And that is when Santiago, Alejandro's younger brother, showed up. 3 years younger than me, he was always the playful type, the one who broke the heavy atmosphere with jokes and easy smiles. But that night, he came differently. Santiago arrived saying he was worried, that he heard from Ernesto that things between us were tense. He sat on the sofa, took a beer from the refrigerator without asking, and started talking to me as if he were an old friend. And I gave in. I started talking too much, crying, venting about things that not even Alejandro knew. He listened to me with an attention I had not received in years, and when he hugged me, my body betrayed everything I claimed to be. I kissed my husband's brother. I kissed without thinking, without measuring, without planning. And I did not stop there. The next morning, my self-loathing was overwhelming, but not enough to stop it from happening again. And again. What was supposed to be a one-time mistake, the result of a moment of weakness, became a recurring secret, a permanent charade. For years, I had an affair with Santiago. In secret. Always amidst my perfect routine of a dedicated wife and exemplary mother. With every lie I told, with every poorly rehearsed excuse, I buried deeper the part of me that once had any honor. The worst part, I was pregnant with Camila when all this began. The time between the last time I was with Alejandro and the first time I was with Santiago was too short to be sure who the father was. But Alejandro never suspected. When he saw the 2 lines on the pharmacy test, he cried. He cried like someone who had finally realized his greatest dream. I will never forget that look. The hope on his face when he said, "We are a real family now." And I, at that moment, decided that he would never know about the doubt. I could not destroy that. Alejandro became even more dedicated during my pregnancy. He painted the room, assembled the crib, and learned to give me back massages to ease my pain. And I kept lying. I told myself it was for love. That it was to protect him, to protect Camila, but it was just cowardice. Santiago, on the other hand, did not claim anything. It was as if we were silent accomplices in something we knew should never have started. We would go for months without seeing each other, and then we would meet again. A sick, disgusting cycle that I no longer knew how to escape. I thought many times about confessing, but I never had the courage. The fear of losing everything was greater than any moral weight. And in the end, I continued. I continued to live 2 lives, that of an honorable woman and that of a traitor. And every time Alejandro looked at Camila with that blind love of a passionate father, my heart broke a little more, because even with all the pain he carried from his childhood, he gave himself completely to fatherhood. And I gave him the crumbs of a broken woman, and still, he loved me. But that would not last forever. Over time, lying became automatic. I no longer needed to think too hard to make up excuses, to justify absences, to cover the tracks of a double life I had built myself. Alejandro remained the ideal husband, perhaps a little more tired, a little more distant, but still present. I hated it, because the more he was, the more I had to lie, and the more I lied, the more I was betraying myself. The sinking feeling was constant, as if I were trying to breathe with a weight tied to my chest, but I did not stop. Pretending was easier than facing the chaos. Even when Camila began to treat Alejandro with indifference, as if he were an intruder in the house, he never defended himself. He tried, in his own way, to get closer. He brought her flowers when she got good grades, he made her breakfast on her birthday, and in the end, he was ignored. And I saw it all. I saw his efforts being thrown in the trash, and still, he maintained the pose that everything was fine. Once, when she turned 17, he sold the motorcycle he loved so much to buy her a used car. And she laughed. She said it looked like a taxi driver's car. It was in that moment that I felt something inside me break completely, but instead of facing the damage, I was a coward. Instead of telling the truth, asking for forgiveness, facing the consequences, I preferred to continue maintaining the charade. I told myself I was protecting everyone, that if I told, it would cause more pain, but that was a lie. I was only protecting myself. Alejandro was already showing signs of exhaustion. He was quieter, spent more time at work, and I acted as if I did not see it, because admitting it would be the first step towards total collapse. The encounters with Santiago had become more spaced out, but they had not stopped. He did not seek me out as often anymore, and that relieved me. Sometimes I even thought he wanted to get rid of it too, but neither of us had the courage to end the cycle. And every time he sent me a message, all it took was a "I'm waiting for you" in the back parking lot for everything to start again. Afterwards, I would go home as if nothing had happened. I would prepare dinner. I helped Camila with her homework. I kissed Alejandro on the forehead as if I had not just betrayed everything he believed in. It was like living in a play that never ended. I played the role of the balanced woman, the loving mother, the loyal wife. Meanwhile, I bore the weight of guilt alone. Sometimes, when I was alone in the bathroom, I would cry silently. But the next day, I would smile again, work, keep up appearances. Everyone said I was enviable. That Alejandro was a lucky guy, and that hurt me in a way I cannot explain. It was as if every compliment was a punch that reminded me of the disgusting farce I was living. And even with all this, Alejandro remained firm, even when Camila started to leave without notice, lying to him, disrespecting him in small ways. He took a deep breath, tried to talk, tried to understand. He never gave up on her, and it killed me inside, because deep down I knew that everything she did was a reflection of me. I was raising a lost daughter based on a dirty lie, a daughter who grew up far from the only man who truly loved her. And still, even with everything on the verge of collapse, I kept pretending. Alejandro was always quiet, observant, but I underestimated his intelligence and, most importantly, his patience. I thought he would never find out, that the years had buried the past well, but he knew. I do not know exactly when he started to suspect, but by the time I found out, it was already too late. One day, while cleaning our nightstand drawer, I found something I should never have seen, an envelope with my name on it sealed. Inside were copies of conversations I swore I had deleted, photos, screenshots, proof of meetings. Attached was a DNA test document. The confirmation, Camila was not his daughter. He never confronted me directly. He did not make a scene. He did not call me anything, on the contrary, he treated me with even more coldness than before. And it was that coldness that made me uncomfortable. It was the silence before the storm. He spent weeks acting normal, too normal. He gave me good morning kisses, had dinner with us, smiled at Camila, but behind that smile was a loaded gun, and he was just waiting for the right moment to shoot. I never imagined the kind of revenge he would be capable of planning. But he did not just want justice, he wanted to destroy me completely. The bomb exploded on Camila's 18th birthday. We threw a party in a rented hall, with a DJ, food for 80 people, and even a retrospective on a giant screen. In the middle of the party, Alejandro asked for the microphone and went up on stage. I thought he was going to make a toast, but what followed was a massacre. He said in clear terms that he had something important to say. The retrospective stopped and something else began to play, intimate videos of me with Santiago, audios, printouts, even messages exchanged with his mother, who, yes, also knew everything. The entire hall fell silent. I tried to run, but my legs would not obey me. I saw the looks of astonishment, the open mouths, the mobile phones raised to film. Camila screamed, cried, said it was a lie. Alejandro ignored her. He said that, unfortunately, she needed to know who we really were, me, Santiago, and even her grandmother. He said he spent the last few years being deceived, raising a daughter who might never be his, and being mocked by everyone around him. At the end, he gave copies of the evidence to all the family members. It was not a tirade, it was a public execution, and he insisted on every detail. I left that room like a ghost, crying, ashamed, afraid to look at any familiar face. Camila looked at me as if I were a monster. Santiago disappeared from there in the middle of the confusion. My family, they turned their backs on me. The parents of Camila's friends, everyone was in shock. The news spread like wildfire. The next day, videos of the moment were already circulating on WhatsApp and the city's social networks. In less than 24 hours, my name was in the mud and Alejandro was gone. He grabbed his things and left. He only left a note. Now you know what it is like to live with a weight on your chest. He did not need to shout. There was no need to threaten. His cruelty was precisely in his control. He waited, he armed, he organized, and he executed. He unmasked me in the most humiliating way possible in front of the people who mattered most to me and to Camila. And that day, I understood it. I understood that the man I destroyed was the same one who, in the end, gave me the most precise and calculated blow anyone could ever give me. He did not just want to get out of my life. He wanted no one to ever look at me the same way again. 2 days after the party, Alejandro came home just to pick up his things. He did not say a word. He filled boxes with my clothes, threw them all in the back of a truck, and took them to a rented storage unit. When I got back from work, the lock had already been changed. The eviction notice was taped to the door. I tried to call him dozens of times. All calls were ignored, and at the end of the week, I received a short and direct email: "You do not live here anymore. Any attempt to enter will be legally prosecuted." Camila, at that moment, was still by my side, or at least I wanted to believe she was. Alejandro refused to see her after the exposure. He said he could no longer maintain ties with a lie. Camila cried every night. She said he needed to forgive her, that she did not know anything, but he was relentless. He said he would no longer finance her university education or any other expense, that she was now of legal age and had to face the consequences. It hurt me to see my daughter rejected like that, but I knew he was broken inside and that he was not going to back down. Santiago also fell. Alejandro filed a lawsuit against him for moral damages and harassment, using part of the evidence he had already gathered. The brother who was once seen as the fun one in the family became the traitor. He was fired from his job as a supervisor at a shipping company in Guadalajara, and a few months later, he started drinking again. The last time I saw him, he was sleeping on an old mattress in his mother's basement, surrounded by botless and without hope. He, who used to smile and joke about everything, was now nothing more than a disaster. However, a part of me blamed him less than I blamed myself. That idea of a perfect family that I pretended to support has completely crumbled. I found myself alone, homeless, with my reputation destroyed. Camila came to live with me in a small rented apartment with what was left of my salary, but her perspective changed. She blamed me. Although she said she loved me, the way she looked at me was different. The pain between us grew silently, heavy, bitter. And Alejandro was living another life. I followed him on social media, even without following him. With every photo he posted with a new smile, a new place, I felt the world spinning faster, just without me. The friends I thought were mine were gone. The mothers from school excluded me from the groups. My colleagues at the bank started to avoid me, even in the hallways. Shortly after, I was transferred to another branch for administrative reasons. The reality was clear. I had become a whispered name, a walking scandal. Even with all this, I still found myself thinking about Alejandro, the way he would hug me from behind while I was washing the dishes, the silly notes he left stuck to the refrigerator. I realized too late that his love was the only real thing I had. It was not just him I had lost. I lost the opportunity to be the woman he saw in me. I lost my daughter's trust, my community's respect, my stability. Everything I took for granted slipped through my fingers like fine sand. And it all started with me, with one choice. A choice I repeated countless times, even though I knew it was taking me away from what really mattered. Now, all that is left are echoes and a silence that screams every time I look at the front door of a house that is no longer mine. Alejandro has always been a discreet man, but when he decided to move on, he did it with the same intensity with which he once loved me. A few months after our separation, I found out through acquaintances that he had reconnected with an old childhood friend, Rosa. They studied together in high school and, before I came into his life, they already had something that was almost a relationship. At that time, she moved to another city with her parents and they lost touch, but it seems that fate found a way to cross their paths again, as if laughing at my personal tragedy. Rosa was everything I never was: patient, gentle, constant. She worked as an occupational therapist and had 2 younger siblings whom she helped care for since their parents became ill. When I heard that she and Alejandro were back together, my stomach turned. And when I saw the first photo of the 2 of them together, him truly smiling, something he had not done in years, something inside me collapsed. It was not jealousy, it was a feeling of absolute emptiness, that I had finally been replaced by someone who, unlike me, knew how to take care of what she received. They started dating and, shortly after, they moved in together. Rosa helped him get out of the pit I threw him into. She encouraged Alejandro to start his own business, an escort and private security company, something he had always wanted to do, and he grew. He got contracts with transport companies, expanded his team, and became a reference in the region. The man I had destroyed was rebuilding his life, only this time with foundations that I could never provide him, and his every step seemed to be a public proof that he no longer needed me. A little over a year later, Rosa became pregnant with twins. I saw the news in a shared post on Facebook, and what hurt me the most was the title, "Now My Family Has Truly Begun." There he was, the man who once dreamed of having a perfect family with me, finally realizing that dream with another woman. The smile in his eyes was undeniable. He looked at peace. I tried to convince myself that it was fair, that it was the natural consequence of my decisions, but the truth is that each of his achievements reminded me of the pain I had caused and what I had lost. Camila, upon learning of the pregnancy, remained silent. I think at that moment, she understood that Alejandro had really closed the cycle with us. He no longer answered calls, did not reply to messages, blocked numbers, burned bridges. He started from scratch. It was as if we had never existed, and maybe for him it was necessary to convince himself of that to be able to move on. Rosa helped him rebuild himself with the kind of love I could never give him, and he finally became a whole man again. I followed everything from a distance, watching him from afar make plans, smile, be called father by children who did not even know of my existence. And all this, although fair, was a cruel reminder. While he was being reborn, I was sinking. And ironically, I hoped he was happy because, deep down, although I was full of pain, I knew that if anyone deserved to start over, it was Alejandro. I just did not imagine that this new beginning would be so definitive, so far away, so impossible to achieve. After the public exposure, Camila was never the same again. At first, she tried to cling to the idea that it was all a temporary nightmare, that people would forget, but reality was much crueler. The videos and screenshots shared on her birthday circulated through WhatsApp groups. They reached the school, the neighborhood, and even the teachers. From one moment to the next, my daughter became the town scandal. Friends disappeared. The boyfriend broke up with her. Even her favorite teacher started to treat her coldly, and I could only watch it all happen without being able to protect her. She tried to be strong. She said she did not care, that those people were never really friends. But with each passing day, Camila withdrew more. She stopped leaving the house, closed her social media accounts, and avoided mirrors. When Alejandro cut off her university payments, she tried to talk to him, She went to the company where he worked and waited for almost 3 hours. He sent a security guard to tell her that he would not see her. She came home in silence and cried all night. It was in that moment that she understood it. To Alejandro, she was also part of the betrayal. With her studies suspended, without friends, without family support beyond me, Camila had to accept the only job she could find, as a waitress in a simple hotel, the same one where, ironically, we had celebrated her 15th birthday. She works in a uniform, serving people who whisper behind her back. Sometimes she comes home with swollen eyes and a broken voice, but she never complains. And that, in a way, scares me more than if she were to scream, because now my daughter carries the same heavy silence that I carried for so many years. And I know exactly where this silence leads. She never said Alejandro's name out loud again. But I know she still loves him. I see it in the way she looks at old photos, in the way she listens to certain songs, in the questions she avoids asking. Once, I found her watching a video of the twins on Rosa's profile. She did not say anything, she just turned off her cell phone and left the room. His rejection did not break her all at once, it ate away at her little by little, like acid. And I know that even if she tries to move on, there is a wound there that may never heal. Because losing a father is one thing, being rejected by him is something else entirely. I advised her to write a letter, to ask for forgiveness, to try to recover some crumb of the relationship. She wrote. It was 3 pages of outbursts of pain, of regret. I delivered it myself to Alejandro's office, because I knew that if she went, he would not even open the door. A week later, I received the envelope back, sealed, with only one sentence written on the back: I no longer have a daughter. Camila did not ask anything, she did not even cry, she just put the paper in her desk drawer and never mentioned it again. Today, Camila is just a shadow of the girl she once was. That restless teenager who dreamed of doing an exchange, working in marketing, traveling the world, disappeared. And in her place, there was a closed-off, distrustful young woman who lives on autopilot. A part of me tries to believe that time can heal, but another part knows that, just like me, she may have to carry the weight of this story for the rest of her life. And the worst part, I was the one who put that weight on her back. The final blow came through the courts. Alejandro used all the evidence he had, videos, audios, messages, testimonies, to build a case against me for parental fraud. The accusation was simple and devastating. I had lied about Camila's paternity, which, by law, constituted intentional deception with financial consequences. The judge accepted. I was ordered to return part of the money Alejandro spent raising her, although I had nothing left. My assets were seized, my car was auctioned, and my name, well, was already in ruins long before the sentence was passed. I was fired from the bank. They said it was for restructuring, but everyone knew the truth. No client wanted to be served by the woman from the scandal. I became dependent on favors. A distant aunt lent me a room in the back of her house in Culiacan. I share the space with boxes, old furniture, and a bed that creaks with every sigh. Sometimes I think about looking for Santiago, but I refuse to sink into that mud again. He also disappeared. His mother started to ignore me as if I had never existed, and maybe for her I never really existed as a daughter-in-law, but only as a mistake. Nowadays, I live on the basics. Temporary jobs, sporadic work in bakeries and stores that still do not care about past scandals. I do not sleep well. I have constant nightmares about the party, the big screen, the faces frozen in shock. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night with my heart racing, as if it were all happening again. I look at old photos and I barely recognize who I was. So many things that could have been different, so many moments when I could have stopped, taken a step back, confessed, but I did not. I was selfish, weak, cowardly, and now I pay for every choice with interest. Camila still lives with me, but it is like sharing space with a stranger. We exchange few words, each one locked in her own void. She works in the morning, studies at night for a technical degree. She does not blame me openly, but the distance speaks for itself. Sometimes I think she is just waiting for a better opportunity to leave forever. And when that day comes, I will not stop her, because I disappointed her more than anyone has ever disappointed me. I do not deserve anything more than the silence she offers me, and even that silence, on some days, hurts more than screaming. The most ironic thing of all is that for years I lied thinking I was protecting everyone from pain. In the end, I destroyed them all. Santiago became an alcoholic failure, Camila was rejected by the only father she knew, and Alejandro, well, he won. He rebuilt his life, remade his story, and erased any trace of me from his path. He got the perfect revenge. He left me without love, without a home, without a name. And now, the only thing I have left is this borrowed room, the memories that haunt me, and the certainty that nothing, absolutely nothing, will erase what I did. Sometimes I look at my cell phone and think about writing to Alejandro. Not to ask for forgiveness, I already understood that does not exist for people like me, but maybe just to say that I regret it, that if I could go back in time, I would have been the woman he deserved. But I never write because I know he would not read it. Or worse, maybe he would read it and smile, because in the end, his greatest victory was precisely that, leaving me alive, carrying this pain alone. And believe me, there is no revenge more cruel than that.